Welcome to Seeking History. Did you know that on the opening day of the very first McDonald's in Moscow, way back in 1990, something like 38,000 customers lined up?
38,000. It's staggering, isn't it?
I mean, some people were queuing from 4 a.m. And get this, it actually broke McDonald's global record for opening day service.
And that number, it tells you right away this wasn't just about grabbing a burger.
Right.
That opening on Pushkin Square, it was something much, much bigger. A real cultural moment, a powerful political event even, a huge symbol of a country going through this massive change.
To really get that, you have to rewind a bit, set the historical scene. Think about the Soviet Union, late 1980s.
Yeah.
The Cold War was thawing, sure, but inside the country, well, things were pretty dire. The system was groaning under economic stagnation. There were shortages everywhere. Basic stuff. Food, goods.
Just about everything, yeah. And against that backdrop, you had Mikhail Gorbachev trying to shake things up with his reforms.
Perestroika and glasnost.
Exactly. Perestroika, the economic restructuring from 85, and glasnost, more openness from 86. The idea was, to revitalize this failing state. But the reality for people was still scarcity, frustration.
And that's where McDonald's coming in feels so... letting in this huge icon of capitalism, a brand the system had always slammed as what? Cheap bourgeois consumption?
Yeah, it wasn't just a casual decision, not at all. It was really quite strategic, maybe even a bit desperate from the government side.
How so?
Well, they were trying to signal change, trying to project this image of progress, of openness, mainly to the West. They hoped bringing in McDonald's would show perestroika was real, maybe attract foreign investment, technology. Even while their own system was, crumbling, McDonald's was like exhibit A for this supposed new openness.
And people definitely saw it that way, didn't they? Inside and outside the USSR, like literally opening a window to a different world.
Oh, absolutely. Some people really hoped it meant a happier Russia. And Pepsi got in way back in 72. McDonald's felt different. More substantial.
More real.
Yeah, more real. It wasn't just a drink. It was a whole experience, a service standard, a visible piece of Western consumer culture. It directly challenged decades of anti-Western stuff. And the public reaction, that massive queue, despite the cost, it showed just how hungry people were for that.
Okay, so this is an incredible story. For this deep dive, let's trace that journey, 14 years it took to get McDonald's to Moscow?
14 years, yeah.
And then dig into the huge operational challenges, what that opening day was really like culturally, and what the whole thing, right up to its recent departure, tells us about Russia's roller coaster history during this period.
It's got everything, hasn't it? International negotiations, clashing economies, supply chain headaches, and just how everyday life changes. History turns up in surprising places.
It really does. So 14 years, how did they even start? 14 years just to open one restaurant? In today's world, that sounds almost unbelievable.
It was an extraordinary effort, so much patience, so much persistence. The driving force behind it was George Cohn, the head of McDonald's Canada. He started the talks way, way back, 1976.
76. So before the Moscow Olympics, before perestroika, deep in the Cold War freeze.
Exactly. But McDonald's, they were a big, stable company. They could afford to play the long game, wait for the politics to shift. Plus, they had to figure out the money side. The Soviet ruble wasn't convertible, so how do you get profits out? That was always a sticking point.
I heard they tried something around the 1980 Moscow Olympics. Was that part of this?
It was, yeah, an early attempt. They proposed setting up a couple of portable restaurants just for the Olympics, mainly for Western visitors.
Because there wasn't really fast food in Moscow then?
Not really, no. So it filled a gap. And apparently, despite some grumbling in the Soviet press about, bourgeois stuff, the Olympic Committee was kind of interested. But it didn't happen. It stalled. Showed how much resistance there still was inside the system to anything too Western, too capitalist.
So even when Gorbachev kicked off perestroika and glasnost in the mid-'80s, it wasn't like the floodgates just opened for McDonald's.
Not straight away, no. Kosan still faced a lot of skepticism, lots of delays. Some of it was practical. I mean, the Soviet food supply chain was notoriously unreliable, inconsistent quality, a nightmare for a company like McDonald's built on total standardization.
Right.
But a big chunk was just navigating that maze of Soviet bureaucracy, that deep-seated ideological caution.
So what finally cracked it? What was the key after all that time?
The breakthrough was the idea of a joint venture, an agreement between McDonald's Canada and the Moscow City Council, the Soviet.
Huh.
And this was really made possible by Gorbachev's reform, specifically the 1988 law on cooperatives. That law allowed collective ownership in services, trade, areas like that. It was a big shift. So the joint venture was this crucial compromise.
A way for the Soviet side to kind of participate, keep some control, save face maybe.
Exactly. It let them frame it differently, like a controlled experiment almost. They signed preliminary agreements in late '87. The plan involved bringing in some Russian-speaking Canadian or British staff to help train the mostly Soviet workforce. And that hybrid model, that approach, it actually proved pretty resilient through the chaos of the 90s.
Okay, so the deal is done, but then comes maybe the biggest hurdle.
Yeah.
Getting the actual food, the ingredients. McDonald's needs everything just so. The Soviet system, not so much.
Oh, this part is legendary in business schools. Trying to build a reliable, quality-controlled supply system inside a command economy that was, frankly, failing to produce basic goods consistently. It was an unprecedented logistical mountain to climb.
The existing Soviet food plants just weren't up to it.
Not even close. Completely inadequate for McDonald's quality and consistency standards.
So they didn't even try to rely on the local system. They just decided we have to build our own.
That was the big strategic call, and incredibly expensive. They poured in $50 million, a massive amount back then, to build their own supply chain from the ground up. That meant going direct to farmers, setting quality standards, creating their own distribution, the whole 9 yards.
And the heart of this was the McComplex, that processing plant outside Moscow.
Absolutely vital. The McComplex was this huge integrated facility designed specifically so they could use exclusively local suppliers. That was key, not just for logistics, but also so they could accept rubles.
Because getting foreign currency out was so hard.
Right. By using local suppliers and paying in rubles and accepting rubles from customers, they bypassed that whole convertibility problem. And eventually, it worked. By 2018, something like 98% of their ingredients were sourced inside Russia.
98% local. That's amazing integration.
Yeah.
What could this McComplex actually do?
It was properly state-of-the-art. Meat production lines, dairy processing, a huge potato plant. I think it could handle 3,000 tons of potatoes a day just for the fries.
Good grief.
Their bakery could churn out 13,000 buns an hour, 1 million buns a week, lines for garnishes, pies, drinks, a proper quality control lab, their own distribution center. They could make like 10,000 burger patties an hour, something like 127,000 cheese slices capacity.
So they weren't just opening a restaurant. They literally built a miniature, vertically integrated market economy just to supply that restaurant.
That's a perfect way to put it. They built a working example of market efficiency, quality control, reliable supply, right inside a system that was falling apart precisely because it lacked those things.
Incredible.
They even built a 12-story office building in Moscow with modern communications, way beyond the Soviet standard then. This self-sufficiency, it was totally necessary because the command economy just couldn't deliver. And it became this powerful, living demonstration of what private enterprise could do. It's a big reason they succeeded when other early joint ventures stumbled.
What an unbelievable amount of groundwork. Just to sell hamburgers, and all that led to that one single legendary day, January 31st, 1990, Pushkin Square, 14 years of pushing, building, finally paying off. And the scene, just wild.
The grand opening, I mean, the reaction was just beyond anything they'd imagined. Like you said, 38,000 customers, queues for hours and hours, people showing up at 4 a.m. for a 10 a.m. opening.
And it sounds crazy for a burger today, but that queue, it broke McDonald's own global record for an opening day.
It did.
What was driving that? It wasn't just, ooh, new food, was it?
Definitely not. It was this deep cultural yearning, a desire for choice, for quality you could rely on, for a different kind of experience than the usual Soviet scarcity and, let's be honest, often crummy service.
Right.
It was hunger for something they'd been told for decades was decadent Western junk, but which they were desperate to taste and see for themselves. It felt like a real, tangible glimpse of a different world.
So for the people who waited all those hours and finally got inside, what hit them first?
Two things kept coming up: the friendly service and the plastic packaging.
The friendly service part is fascinating. Soviet service wasn't exactly known for beaming smile.
Notoriously not. But the McDonald's staff, and remember, they picked just 630 people from 27,000 applicants, were meticulously trained, not just on the machines, but specifically how to maintain an American-style smile.
That was actual training.
Oh, yeah. It was totally alien to the Soviet way. Customer interactions were usually brief, transactional, sometimes even rude. A former worker said you could see the surprise on customers' faces. being greeted with, "Please come here, thank you, come again." It was almost revolutionary in that context.
Wow. And the packaging. Seems so normal now, but that was a big deal then.
A huge deal. In the Soviet Union then, even getting a simple plastic bag was a thing. You might queue for it. So
Yeah.
getting your meal in clean, disposable stuff, plastic foam trays, paper wrappers, plastic cups, it felt modern, hygienic, and just abundant. It was an unusual thing and an unusual concept, as people put it.
How about the food itself? Did everyone love it?
Actually, reactions were a bit mixed. Some found it wanting, maybe they expected something else, but plenty of others thought it was unusual and delicious.
But the context mattered.
Totally. Often their reaction was immediately followed by something like, "We need more places like this, there's nothing in our stores or restaurants." The food itself just threw the daily shortages into sharp relief.
Okay, but what about the price? A Big Mac wasn't exactly pocket change for the average Soviet citizen, right?
Far from it. 3 rubles and 75 kopecks. That was roughly half a day's average wages, or maybe a third of a typical daily wage. Pretty steep. You definitely heard people grumbling, "They're ripping us off."
So if it was that expensive, how did it get this reputation for being somehow democratic, which some sources mention?
That's the crucial bit. Unlike a lot of other places popping up then that wanted hard currency or catered only to the elite, McDonald's made a point of accepting only rubles.
Only rubles.
Yeah, so while it was expensive in rubles, the fact was anyone with rubles could theoretically save up and go. It wasn't restricted to people with dollars or special access. That made it feel more accessible, more democratic in that specific context compared to the foreign currency shops. That ruble-only policy was a really smart part of their integration strategy.
That really captures the tension, doesn't it? This symbol of Western aspiration, quite expensive, reflecting the weak economy, yet uniquely open because it took local money.
And the fact people were willing to pay that relatively high price just underlined how incredibly deep the demand was for quality, for choice, for a different experience that command economy just couldn't deliver.
And delivering that experience, especially to 38,000 people on day one, meant having staff ready to go.
Absolutely. And the interest was phenomenal. Like we said, 27,000 Russians applied for those first 630 jobs.
Wow.
That tells you a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
People wanted stable jobs with this famous global company. Probably figured it meant better pay, better conditions than the state jobs.
And they didn't just hire anyone.
No, they were quite selective, aiming for the best and brightest. Often people with language skills got preference. And their training wasn't just about burgers and fries. It was about instilling a whole new approach to customer service, a different workplace culture.
Back to that American-style smile training again.
Exactly. It sounds maybe a bit funny now, but it was about meticulous training on being genuinely friendly, engaging, focusing on the customer, a total contrast to the usual Soviet model. McDonald's was deliberately trying to embed this idea that the interaction itself mattered, not just the transaction.
And did that actually have a wider impact? Did it ripple outwards?
I think it definitely did, subtly. As the Russian economy started its bumpy transition to a market system, the standards people saw at McDonald's and the skills those trained employees took elsewhere eventually started to influence expectations. It showed what positive service could look like. It probably encouraged other new businesses to think differently about dealing with the public.
So it wasn't just training staff for the restaurants. It was kind of modeling a new service culture for the emerging economy.
Yeah, in a way, they were selling burgers, but also demonstrating a whole different way of doing business in that environment.
Looking back now, you really can't separate McDonald's arrival from the bigger political picture, can you?
No way. It was explicitly seen and positioned as this powerful symbol of the changes happening, the economic and political reforms under Gorbachev. For lots of people, it was real, tangible proof that the country was opening up after being closed off for so long.
It was literally giving people a taste of the market inside a command economy that had just completely failed them on consumer goods.
Right, and the success of McDonald's itself, how efficiently it ran, the quality it highlighted, what market principles could achieve. But, by contrast, it also really underlined the deep failures of the Soviet system around it. McDonald's represented the promise of perestroika, a modern, consumer-focused economy. But for a long time, that promise mostly stayed inside the Golden Arches. It didn't spread through the whole society as fast as people hoped.
But its impact on Russian consumer culture over the long haul was massive.
Oh, absolutely profound. Over the next 30 years, McDonald's didn't just stick around, it absolutely boomed. It became the #1 fast food chain, grew to over 800 restaurants by 2022.
800.
Yeah. And for countless Russians, especially outside the big cities maybe, McDonald's was genuinely their first experience at a restaurant. It introduced the things we take for granted. Quick, standardized service, knowing the food will be the same everywhere, a menu that's always available. These were luxuries in the Soviet context.
And the fact that when they finally left, this local copycat, Kuzinotochka, tasty and odd, sprang up almost instantly to take its place.
Yeah.
That says a lot about how ingrained it had become.
It really does. It shows that legacy. The demand for that type of dining, affordable, quick, consistent, family-friendly, was so deeply embedded in Russian habits by then that when McDonald's pulled out, the market, even with state involvement, immediately tried to fill that exact same niche, just under a new Russian brand.
And economically, that strategy they had from the start, focus on local suppliers, only accept rubles, that was key to surviving and thriving after the Soviet Union collapsed, wasn't it?
Absolutely critical. Getting to 98% local sourcing by 2018 meant they were woven into the fabric of the Russian agricultural and food processing sectors. And by reinvesting their ruble profits inside Russia to expand, instead of constantly trying to get money out, they built up this huge first mover advantage. They could just keep growing as the new Russian market economy lurched forward. They didn't just build restaurants, they built a big piece of Russia's modern service industry.
They really went from being this foreign symbol to being, in many ways, a deeply Russian business over those decades.
Completely.
And then, after 30-plus years, 800 restaurants, 62,000 employees, hundreds of Russian suppliers, the story takes this sharp, dramatic turn in 2022.
It really did. Everything changed with the geopolitical shift after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. McDonald's initially suspended operations, and then in May 2022, they made the huge decision to exit Russia altogether.
And that exit felt just as symbolic as the opening day back in 1990, didn't it?
Hugely symbolic. For so many people, inside Russia and out, it felt like the conclusion of an era. That feeling from 1990, the optimism, the sense that Russia was joining the West, that felt definitively over. It was widely seen as a really significant, tangible step backward.
And they sold the whole operation, restaurant, supply chain, everything, to a local guy, Alexander Govor, who already ran some franchises.
That's right, and he moved incredibly fast to rebrand everything as Vkusnoye Tochka, tasty and dot, basically. Though, interestingly, the deal apparently included a 15-year option for McDonald's to potentially buy the restaurants back someday.
And leaving wasn't cheap for McDonald's itself.
No, they took a big financial hit, reported a charge of somewhere between $1.2 and $1.4 billion directly because of pulling out of Russia.
And the new chain, Vkusnoye Tochka, didn't exactly have a smooth start trying to fill those enormous shoes.
Oh yeah, definitely not. There were loads of reports right away about problems. Shortages of key ingredients like French fries, partly supply chain disruption, partly import issues. Even some pretty embarrassing quality control slip-ups, like pictures of moldy buns showing up online.
Ouch.
It really highlighted just how complex and fine-tuned that Operation McDonald's had built over decades actually was. Not so easy to just replicate overnight.
So what does this departure tell us, looking at the bigger sweep of Russian history since 1990?
Well, it really acts like a kind of barometer of Russia's relationship with the West.
Right.
The entry symbolized hope, opening up, integration. The departure signaled a pretty stark reversal, closing that window to a different world that opened in 1990.
Right.
And the immediate appearance of this state-approved, patriotic replacement chain, even with its early problems, that also tells you something. It shows the state trying to manage the narrative, replace a Western icon with a domestic one, using brands as political symbols.
But the fact they had to replace it, that the state felt the need to provide a McDonald's-like experience, that speaks to how powerful that consumer culture became, doesn't it?
It really, really does. Even as Russia tries to pull away from the West politically and economically, those consumer habits, those expectations for that kind of food service, shaped over 30 years, they're so deeply ingrained that the state couldn't just ignore the demand. They had to step in and offer a substitute. It just shows how influential that consumer culture, which really blossomed after the Soviet collapse, remains.
It's proof, maybe, that consumerism put down roots deep enough that even a return to a more controlled economy couldn't just pull them up.
It's an amazing full-circle story when you think about it.
It really is. The journey of McDonald's in Russia. It starts with this huge struggle to bring market ideas into a failing command economy. Then it navigates the chaos of the 90s to become this massive, integrated success story in a new market economy. And finally, it ends with this symbolic departure and replacement by a state-backed brand, suggesting maybe a swing back towards more state control in economic life.
Yeah, and despite the politics, despite the exit, you can't deny the impact McDonald's had. It proved market principles could work in Russia. It fundamentally changed consumer habits and what people expected over 3 decades. And that demand they tapped into, it's clearly still there. Look how quickly Vkusno i Tochka took off, despite the bumps.
It's amazing how this one story about a hamburger joint on Pushkin Square ends up telling us so much about global politics, clashing economic systems, and just how these huge historical shifts affect everyday life.
It makes you think, doesn't it? What does this specific history tell you about how powerful consumer culture can be as a force for change? Or maybe where its limits are when it slams up against big geopolitical shifts?
And that rapid rise of Vkusno i Tochka, basically replicating the McDonald's formula under a different flag. It really underscores how deep those consumer habits can get, maybe deeper even than political ideology sometimes.
What does that tell us about what people really value, when they actually have choices?
A really provocative thought to leave things on. This has been a fascinating deep dive into a really unique slice of modern history.